Hey everyone. As By the time you guys get this, you guys will have known the news that we are probably not coming back to school again this year, which is extremely disappointing to myself and your teachers as well. I don't know of any teacher that is not devastated by this news. I know I had a really rough time last night. I was angry. I was disappointed, I was sad, and I even cried. And I will be the first to admit that it affected me that much. You guys were a great group of kids, and you guys will always have a special place in my heart. I'm not saying goodbye. I know we will see each other again, just not in that classroom. I'm pretty sure we'll have a chance to be able to get back into the room to collect your things or whatnot. Pretty sure we'll be meeting with Mr. McCormick soon to discuss a plan. But I am extremely disappointed. But that's how it is, and I think this will hopefully make us better people in the long run, and appreciate the times that we did have, and appreciate school even more as we open back up, hopefully on schedule in September. But anyways, enough of the bad things. Let's try to make good use of this. It's snowing again today on Friday, but it was actually pretty cool looking to see some snow coming down. I remember my wife and I are on Facebook, and a couple years ago they have a thing called Facebook Memories, and it takes you back about what you might have posted on this day. And there was a lot of snow on the ground 2 years ago today. Yesterday's Facebook memory was my wife and I went to a Brewers game at Miller Park, and there were snowbanks in the parking lot at Miller Park. And so I'm grateful for that there's no snow this year, late April. So anyways, just keep looking for the positive things. I've gotten to know a lot more people better because of this, because we're reaching out to each other more. I'm seeing a lot more people go out before. I'm being more friendly to people, being positive, and because we could sit here and sulk and be negative, but it doesn't change our current situation. The only thing you can change is yourself. And I encourage you guys to be positive, look at the good things. I miss every single one of you guys. I really do. Not a day goes by where I don't think about something that happened during the school year. I'm disappointed also too, and I just thought about this, that the photo wall that we had of our year, we're not gonna be able to finish that. And that was a thing that I do every year with my kids, and unfortunately we weren't able to do that this year. So anyways, all right, so we are on chapter 14 of Bud Not Buddy. Now he's with the band, and they made an agreement with him that they were gonna go eat somewhere. So let's see what happens in chapter 14. When we got into the restaurant, I could see that it was someone's living room that they'd set about 10 card tables and some folding chairs in. Every table but one was filled, and there were 5 or 6 people standing in the doorway waiting to sit down. We said, "Excuse us," and walked right past. Then the smell of the place got under my nose, and I could tell why folks were lining up to get in. I closed my eyes and took in a big snort of air. It was like someone took an old pot and poured about 100 gallons of hot apple cider and 100 gallons of hot coffee into it, then stirred 8 or 9 sweet potato pies, crust and all, into that, then let 6 big steamy meatloafs float on top of all that, then threw in a couple of handfuls of smashed potatoes, and boiled the whole thing on high. This must be exactly how heaven smells. I could tell by the smell that Mr. Jimmy was telling the truth when he said this was the best restaurant in Grand Rapids. Shucks, I've never eaten in one before, but I'd say this was the best restaurant in the world. I opened my eyes because the smell was starting to get me dizzy. On the other side of the room, Herman E. Calloway was sitting at a table with Mr. Jimmy and a woman. Steady Eddie pointed at the only empty table, one that had a sign saying "Reserved NBC" on top of it, and said, "That's where we're at, over there, bud. NBC stands for nobody but Calloway." Mr. C changes the name of the band so much that no one can keep up with the new names, so they call us NBC so they don't have to change the sign. Before I could sit down with them, Mr. Jimmy saw us and said, Here they are." He pointed at me and waved for me to come over to their table. Shucks, I'd rather sit with the band than with Herman E. Calloway. It would be hard to have a good time eating if you looked up and saw him every time you took a bite. The thug said, "Remember what I said?" Pointed at the top of his head and acted like he was smacking some kisses. I walked to the other table. Mr. Jimmy said, "Bud, this here's Miss Thomas. She's our vocal stylist." She could tell I didn't know what that meant, so she said, "I'm the singer, honey." I said, "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." She laughed and stuck her hand out for me to shake. There were about 9 diamond rings on just her right hand. She said, "Oh my, a gentleman. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance as well." Then she took all those ringed up fingers and rubbed them across my cheek, held my chin and said, "Come here, child," and pulled my face up close to hers. Uh-oh. I twisted up my face to get ready for a kiss, but instead she looked real close at me and said, "What's this, baby?" She rubbed her fingers over a couple of sting spots that I'd been scratching. For a second, I was going to tell her they were vampire bites, but something told me to tell the truth this time. I said, "That's just some hornet stings, ma'am. I got bit up when the Amoses locked me in their shed." It was her turn to twist her face up. "When who locked you up in what shed?" "They were the people the home was paying to look after me. I got bit by their fish head guards." I showed the woman my bite on my hand. I was surprised to see it was puffing out from pus. "My lord," she said, "Herman, this child's hand is infected. None of you men noticed how he looks? Herman E. Calloway said, "Talk to James. As far as I know, he's the only one who looked at the kid." Mr. Jamie said, "Well, Grace, to be truthful, I did think the boy's face was a little swole up. But you know how dark it is in the cabin. And by God, there are some folks who just naturally have lopsided heads." She said, "Dark or not, even blind Lemon Jefferson could see something's wrong with this baby's eye. What happened here, Bud?" She touched underneath my eye, as light as a feather. I said, "Well, ma'am, Todd Amos woke me up by shoving a pencil up my nose all the way to the R, and when I went to punch him, I slapped him instead, and it left a big welt on his cheek, so we put up our dukes and went at it, and it didn't take long before I knew I couldn't whoop him, so I just curled up and fell down." I looked at Herman E. Calloway to make sure he was listening to the next part. I wanted to let him know that even though he was real mean, our minds thought about things in the exact same way. I said, "I fell down, ma'am, because the Lord gave me the good sense to know when enough is enough." He acted like he didn't hear. So I kept talking to Mrs. Thomas. Then Mrs. Amos came, and I could tell they'd gone through my suitcase even though they promised they wouldn't. And she locked me up in the shed where those hornets and fish head guards got a hold of me. Miss Thomas looked like this was some real amazing news. Herman E. Calloway said, "Sounds like a case of diarrhea of the mouth and constipation of the brain." Miss Thomas gave him a dirty look and said, "You said the home, Bud. What kind of a home? Where's your mama?" I said, "She died 4 years ago, ma'am." She put her hand on my shoulder and I said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. How about your daddy? Do you know where he's at?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Where is he, honey?" I pointed dead at Herman E. Calloway's big belly again and said, "That's him right there." What's that? Anything? No? Miss Thomas said, looked like she wanted to smile, but she said, "Now, Bud, I've only known you for a couple of minutes, but I can tell your mama did a fine job of raising you. I can see you've had a good, proper upbringing, so I'm kind of surprised you're pointing like that." She was right. I brought my finger down. I said, "I'm sorry, ma'am." She said, "That's fine, but it wasn't me who got pointed at." I told Herman E. Calloway, "I'm sorry, sir, but I didn't mean it." She smiled and said, "That's better. We all make mistakes. You know what, Bud? You look like you could use a good meal, so why don't you sit right there and join us?" She pointed a ring-covered finger at the empty chair direct across from him. Shucks, how can anyone enjoy their food with Herman E. Calloway staring right back at you? But maybe my luck was starting to change. As soon as I sat down, Herman E. Calloway picked up his coffee cup and said, "If you excuse me, this is about where I came in." They walked over to where the band was sitting. He told them, "All right, someone's got to give me their seat. Go sit with James and Miss Grace. Oh, and my son." For a second, it looked like a stampede of dusky devastators of the Depression. They all jumped up at once and started heading for our table. They saw what they'd done, laughed, and Steady Eddie said, "Take my seat, Mr. C. I want to talk to that kid. He's got the look of a future sax man about him." He came to our table. Miss Thomas asked me, "Do you mind if I order your supper, Bud?" I said, "No, ma'am. I couldn't believe you got to order what you wanted. I thought you just sat down and they'd bring you whatever was on the stove." A woman came up to the table. She said, "Y'all ready, Miss Thomas?" Miss Thomas said, "We sure are, Tyler." Tyler said, "Who's the little fella? Did y'all pick him up something new? Did y'all pick up someone new for the band?" Miss Thomas laughed. "They're getting younger all the time, aren't they? This here's Bud, and he's going to be our guest for a while, so I want to impress him with something special." Tyler said, "Well, you know you brought him to the right place. It's nice to meet you, Bud." I said, "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." She said, "Ma'am, mercy. Miss Thomas, your guest has some real fine manners. I can tell that he isn't one of those rude, crude folks Mr. Calloway usually scours up." Steady Eddie said, "Tyler, I am crushed." She said, "Bud, I apologize for mistaking you for a musician." I told her, "That's okay, ma'am. No offense taken." Miss Thomas said, "Is there any more of that meatloaf left?" "Yes, ma'am, sure is." "How about some okra and mashed potatoes, too, Bud?" "Thank you, ma'am." "And does a glass of apple cider sound good?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." "Okay," she said, "I'll have the same." Mr. Jimmy ordered a supper that was all the way different from mine. And Steady Eddie ordered one that was all the way different from his. No wonder you hear about rich folks going to restaurants once a week. This was great. Miss Tyler went away and Miss Thomas started back on me. "Bud, I've got to let you know that I'm pretty sure that there's just no way that Mr. C is your father. Tell me what gave you the idea he was." "My mother did, ma'am." Miss Thomas looked over at Mr. Jimmy real quick. She said, "Sweetheart, did you know a whole lot of people all over the state know Mr. C? Did you know he's pretty famous?" "No, ma'am." Well, you know what I think? I think maybe your mother heard him on the radio or heard somebody talking about him or saw the band somewhere and told you that Mr. C reminded her of your father and you misunderstood what she meant. Isn't that possible?" I don't think so, ma'am." She looked at me for a second, then said, "Did she come right out and say your daddy is Herman E. Calloway, Bud?" "Well, almost, but not in words just like that." "And tell me what the words were like, honey." Uh-oh. It was going to be hard to explain to Miss Thomas about Mighty Maples and hints from Flyers. As long as I kept Herman E. Calloway being my father to myself, the whole thing made real good sense. But as soon as I tried to tell other folks about it, it seemed like maybe it was something some stupid kid had dreamed up. Like it was wishing and hoping instead of something true and real. I looked down at my suitcase and said, "Well," and I could tell my luck was changing. Before I could say anything else, Miss Tyler was at our table with the tray. Miss Thomas reached across the table, patted my hand, and said, "We'll talk tomorrow, Bud. I bet you're sick and tired of answering people's questions, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." But I did notice that she said tomorrow. That might mean you weren't going to try to send me back to Flint right away. Miss Thomas said,